Have you ever noticed how certain books seem to find you at exactly the right moment? Not when you're searching for them, but when your soul desperately needs their wisdom. This isn't coincidence, it's an ancient principle that Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, built into the very fabric of spiritual knowledge. Thoth understood something profound. Forced enlightenment creates spiritual bypassing and genuine harm. So he designed his most powerful teachings to operate like a cosmic library where books choose their readers, not the other way around. These texts remain completely invisible until your consciousness reaches the precise frequency needed to receive them safely. Think about it, you're watching this video right now because something drew you here. That same mysterious force guided Jessica to an impossible marketplace where items only became purchasable when her consciousness aligned with her true need, not her surface desires. While most people frantically consume spiritual content trying to force awakening, true advancement happens through readiness and surrender. This video found you because you're finally prepared for these specific insights about Thoth's hidden teachings. When Jessica, the Damascus merchant from our last discussion, first encountered Thoth's writings, she made the same mistake that countless others have made throughout history. She approached the text thinking it would teach her how to manifest gold, silks, and prosperity for her trading business. What she discovered instead fundamentally changed her understanding of reality itself. Thoth's teachings reveal something that modern manifestation culture has completely backwards. You see, most people today are taught that consciousness is something produced by the brain, a byproduct of neural activity happening inside your skull. Thoth understood the opposite. Consciousness is the fundamental fabric from which everything else emerges. Matter, energy, time, space. These are all expressions of consciousness, not the other way around. This isn't just ancient philosophy. When you really examine your direct experience, you never actually encounter matter independent of consciousness. Every sensation, every thought, every perception happens within awareness. You've never experienced a world outside of consciousness, yet somehow we've been conditioned to believe consciousness is the secondary phenomenon. Jessica's breakthrough came when she stopped trying to use her mind to manipulate external circumstances and started recognizing that her external circumstances were already a perfect reflection of her internal consciousness. State. This is what Thoth meant by as above, so below. The outer world is literally the mirror of inner consciousness states. Here's where most manifestation attempts fail, catastrophically. People try to create abundance while operating from a consciousness of lack. They visualize wealth while feeling poor. They affirm love while believing they're unworthy of it. They attempt to manifest connection while experiencing deep separation from themselves and others. Thoth taught that this approach is like trying to change your reflection by manipulating the mirror. The reflection will always match what's standing in front of it. If you want to change what appears in your external reality, you must first embody the consciousness that naturally produces that reality. Let me give you a concrete example from the historical accounts. There was a Roman scholar who sought out Thoth's writings during the height of the empire. He desperately wanted to manifest political influence and power. He found fragments of the text, performed the rituals, spoke the incantations. Nothing happened. Years later, after losing everything and spending time in genuine self-reflection, he encountered the same text again. This time, instead of seeking power over others, he was seeking understanding of his own nature. The text revealed entirely different layers of meaning, and synchronicities began flowing into his life effortlessly. The difference wasn't in the text or the techniques. The difference was in his state of consciousness when approaching them. Thoth's principle of consciousness-based manifestation operates through what he called the unified field of consciousness, the recognition that individual awareness and universal awareness are the same fundamental reality appearing as multiplicity. When you're aligned with this understanding, manifestation becomes as natural as breathing because you're no longer trying to get something from outside yourself. You're allowing what already exists in consciousness to take form. This is why the ancient accounts consistently show that Thoth's knowledge only materialized for those whose souls genuinely required it, not those who merely wanted it. The soul's requirements arise from your deepest authentic nature, while wants typically come from ego-driven desires for security, validation, or control. Ego-driven manifestation often backfires because it's based on the illusion of separation. When you believe you're a separate individual trying to manipulate an external world, you're working against the fundamental nature of reality. Soul-aligned creation flows effortlessly because it recognizes that consciousness is already whole and complete, simply allowing different aspects of itself to emerge. So how do you recognize when you're in the right consciousness state for authentic manifestation? Thoth described several unmistakable signs. First, you feel complete before receiving anything. There's no desperate grasping or attachment to outcomes. Second, you experience genuine gratitude in advance, not as a technique but as a natural response to recognizing what's already present. Third, your desires feel completely natural and obvious, like water flowing downhill. Most people make critical mistakes because they don't understand Thoth's teaching about divine timing and readiness. They try to force manifestations when their consciousness hasn't matured enough to handle what they're requesting. This is like a child demanding to drive a car. The desire might be sincere, but the development isn't sufficient. Thoth also warned about what happens when people receive manifestations before they're ready. The external changes often create chaos because the person's internal foundation can't support them. Think about lottery winners who lose everything within a few years, or people who achieve fame before developing the psychological stability to handle it. Some of Thoth's most powerful manifestation techniques are too advanced to share publicly on YouTube, which is why we reserve them for our free Insights Academy newsletter, where we can share this hidden knowledge more safely. Sign up now and receive a free copy of the Kabbalion for a limited time only. The deeper truth that Thoth revealed is that authentic manifestation is never about getting what you want. It's about becoming what you seek. If you want abundance, you must embody abundant consciousness. If you want love, you must recognize the love that you already are. If you want wisdom, you must align with the wisdom that's already present in awareness itself. Jessica discovered this when she stopped trying to manifest successful trades and started embodying the consciousness of someone who naturally creates value for others. Her business transformed not because she manipulated external circumstances, but because her entire approach to commerce shifted from taking to giving, from scarcity to abundance, from fear to love. This is Thoth's ultimate teaching about manifestation. You don't create anything new. You simply allow consciousness to express different aspects of its infinite nature through the apparent individual that you are. When you understand this, the whole struggle around manifestation dissolves, and life becomes a natural expression of consciousness knowing itself in countless beautiful forms. I want to tell you about something that changed everything I thought I knew about spiritual growth. It started with a blacksmith named Brandon who discovered something profound about the nature of transformation itself. Brandon had been forcing red-hot metal into shapes for years, wrestling with it, hammering it into submission. His pieces were functional but lifeless. Then one day, watching molten metal flow naturally into a mold, he realized he'd been fighting the very essence of what he was trying to create. The metal wanted to flow into its perfect form. He just needed to create the right conditions and get out of the way. This wasn't just a lesson about metalwork. Brandon had stumbled onto what Thoth called the fundamental law governing all spiritual advancement, the law of spiritual readiness. And once you understand this principle, you'll see why so much of modern spiritual seeking leads to frustration, spiritual bypassing, and what the ancients called the inflation of the unripened soul. Here's what Thoth understood that we've forgotten. Consciousness cannot be forced into higher states any more than Brandon could force that metal into beauty. Every attempt to rush, push, or artificially accelerate spiritual growth creates resistance within the psyche itself. It's like trying to make a flower bloom faster by pulling on its petals. You destroy the very thing you're trying to nurture. The Hermetic texts are crystal clear about this. Thoth encoded this principle into every genuine spiritual teaching because he witnessed what happens when people try to skip the natural stages of inner development. They develop what we now recognize as spiritual materialism, collecting experiences, techniques, and insights like trophies while their fundamental character remains unchanged. But there's something even more fascinating here. Thoth identified 4 specific stages that consciousness moves through as it becomes ready for deeper truth. These aren't steps you can rush through or hack with the right meditation app. The first stage is the dissolution of ego attachments, not the destruction of the ego. That's a common misunderstanding that leads to spiritual bypassing. I'm talking about the gradual recognition that your identity isn't actually built from your achievements, your roles, or even your spiritual experiences. This dissolution happens naturally as you begin to see through the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are. Most people try to force this stage by adopting spiritual identities or practices that make them feel detached or above ordinary human concerns. But forced detachment isn't wisdom, it's just another form of ego protection. True dissolution happens when life itself shows you, through experience, where you're still clinging to false identities. The second stage is the development of genuine humility. And I don't mean the self-deprecating kind or the spiritual humility that's really just pride in disguise. Thoth was pointing to something much more profound, the recognition that consciousness itself is far vaster and more mysterious than anything your individual mind can grasp. This kind of humility can't be cultivated through affirmations or practices. It emerges naturally when you've had enough genuine encounters with the mystery to realize how little you actually know. It's the difference between intellectual understanding and lived wisdom. The third stage is the cultivation of inner stillness. Not the temporary quiet you might achieve through meditation, but a fundamental shift in how consciousness relates to its own movement. Most spiritual seekers try to create stillness by controlling their thoughts or emotions. But Thoth taught that true stillness is more like learning to rest in the space that's already there, the awareness within which all thoughts and emotions arise. Remember the astronomer Michelle from our earlier discussion? She spent years straining with increasingly powerful telescopes, trying to see the prophesied star through sheer effort and better technology. Only when she stopped forcing her physical eyes to see what couldn't be seen that way, could she perceive with what the mystics call the eye of the heart. Her breakthrough came not from trying harder, but from learning to receive what was already being offered. The fourth stage is developing the capacity to receive without grasping. This might be the most subtle and crucial stage of all. It's the ability to be open to spiritual insight, guidance, or experience without immediately trying to possess it, understand it, or use it to enhance your spiritual identity. Think about how this applies to spiritual seeking today. People read about enlightenment experiences and immediately want to recreate them. They learn about mystical states and develop elaborate practices to achieve them. They hear about spiritual gifts and wonder why they haven't manifested in their own lives. This is grasping disguised as seeking. Thoth understood that each soul has its own unique timing for awakening, what he called the divine chronos of individual consciousness. This timing can't be artificially accelerated without creating what the Hermetic text calls spiritual imbalance, a condition where someone has access to experiences or insights they're not developmentally ready to integrate. Here's where it gets really interesting. There's a crucial difference between spiritual ambition and spiritual aspiration. Spiritual ambition is ego-driven. It wants spiritual experiences to enhance the self-image or to escape ordinary human challenges. Spiritual aspiration comes from a deeper place. It's the soul's natural movement toward greater wholeness and truth. You can tell the difference by paying attention to the quality of your spiritual desires. Are you seeking spiritual growth to become someone special, to transcend your current life circumstances, or to gain powers or abilities? That's spiritual ambition. And it will always create resistance because it's coming from the same ego structure that spiritual growth naturally dissolves. Authentic spiritual aspiration feels different. It's more like a plant growing toward light, natural, gradual, and in harmony with your actual life circumstances. It doesn't try to escape your humanity, but to bring greater consciousness to it. Thoth's teachings have appeared throughout history in countless forms, always calibrated to the seeker's current level of readiness. Sometimes as books that seem to find their way into your hands at exactly the right moment. Sometimes as teachers who appear when you've developed the capacity to truly hear what they're offering. Sometimes as life experiences that crack open your understanding in ways no teaching could. The Hermetic principle, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, operates not just with human teachers, but with all forms of spiritual guidance and knowledge. The readiness isn't something you can fake or force. It's a genuine developmental capacity that emerges through lived experience and inner work. So how do you know if you're trying to force spiritual progress versus allowing natural unfolding? Pay attention to the quality of effort in your spiritual life. Forcing feels effortful, frustrated, and often leads to spiritual comparison with others. Natural unfolding feels more like cooperation with something that's already wanting to emerge through you. The deepest teaching here is that spiritual growth isn't something you do to yourself, it's something you learn to allow and support. Like Brandon with his metalwork, Your job is to create the right conditions and then trust the intelligence of consciousness itself to do what it naturally does, evolve toward greater truth, love, and wisdom. In the deepest chambers of his temple workshops, the master blacksmith Kenti made a discovery that would change everything he thought he knew about strength. For years, he had hammered bronze with increasing force, believing that power came from domination over the metal, but the strongest pieces kept cracking under pressure. Then one day, exhausted from fighting a particularly stubborn piece of copper, he simply laid down his hammer and watched. He noticed how the metal wanted to flow, where it naturally bent, how it responded to gentle heat rather than brutal force. When he worked with the metal's inherent nature instead of against it, something miraculous happened. The resulting alloy was stronger than anything he had ever created through force alone. This story, preserved in the fragments we've recovered, illustrates perhaps Thoth's most counterintuitive teaching, that true power emerges not from control, but from complete alignment with universal forces through surrender. And before you dismiss this as passive weakness, understand that Thoth's concept of surrender represents the most sophisticated form of power dynamics ever conceived. Think about what happens when you're desperately trying to remember someone's name. The harder you strain, the more elusive it becomes. But the moment you stop trying and turn your attention elsewhere, the name surfaces effortlessly. Thoth understood this principle on a cosmic scale. He taught that the ego's frantic attempts to control outcomes actually create the very resistance that blocks those outcomes from manifesting. The consciousness frequency we discussed earlier, that precise vibrational state that matches what you seek to manifest, cannot be achieved through force. It emerges naturally when you stop fighting the current of universal intelligence and allow it to flow through you instead. This is why Thoth's teachings were so closely guarded. They revealed that most human suffering stems from a single source, resistance to what is. But Thoth didn't teach blind submission. He outlined 4 specific types of surrender, each requiring tremendous courage and wisdom to master. The first is surrender of outcomes, trusting the process, even when you can't see the destination. This doesn't mean abandoning your desires, but holding them lightly enough that you remain open to something even better than what your limited perspective could imagine. The second type involves surrendering your attachment to timing. We live in a culture obsessed with instant gratification, but Thoth understood that universal intelligence operates on rhythms far more sophisticated than our impatient demands. Seeds don't grow faster when you dig them up to check their progress. The most powerful manifestations often require periods of invisible preparation that our surface mind cannot perceive. Timothy Walker's healing practice, documented in those remarkable journals we examined earlier, provides a perfect example of this principle in action. Walker discovered that his most effective remedies worked only when patients approached with what he called humble receptivity. Those who demanded specific cures within predetermined timeframes rarely experienced healing. But patients who surrendered their attachment to particular outcomes while maintaining clear intention often recovered in ways that surprised even Walker himself. The third type of surrender Thoth taught involves releasing attachment to methods. Your ego wants to control not just what happens, but exactly how it happens. This creates tunnel vision that blinds you to the infinite pathways universal intelligence might use to fulfill your deepest needs. Some of the most extraordinary opportunities in life arrive disguised as problems, setbacks, or completely unexpected detours from your planned route. The fourth and most profound surrender involves releasing your attachment to identity, letting go of who you think you should be. This terrifies the ego because it believes your constructed identity is keeping you safe. But Thoth taught that this false self is actually a prison that prevents you from accessing your true capabilities. When you stop defending a limited version of yourself, you create space for your authentic power to emerge. Here's where most people misunderstand surrender completely. They equate it with passivity, resignation, or giving up. Nothing could be further from Thoth's teachings. True surrender is the most powerful action you can take because it aligns your personal will with cosmic will. Instead of swimming against the current, you learn to navigate with such skill that the river's power becomes your own. This connects directly to the Hermetic principle of rhythm that Thoth mastered. Everything in the universe moves in cycles, expansion and contraction, action and rest, giving and receiving. Fighting these natural rhythms creates exhaustion and frustration. But when you learn to flow with them, you accomplish more with less effort than you ever thought possible. Modern life has forgotten this wisdom entirely. We're taught to maintain constant action, perpetual growth, endless productivity. The result? Epidemic burnout, anxiety, and a pervasive sense that we're running faster and faster while getting nowhere. Thoth's teachings offer a radically different approach: strategic surrender that allows you to work with universal forces rather than against them. Practicing this doesn't mean becoming passive. It means developing the discernment to know when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to step back and allow. It means taking inspired action, movement that emerges from alignment rather than desperation or force. The practical application starts with small experiments. Notice where you're gripping too tightly in your daily life. Maybe it's trying to control a conversation's outcome, forcing a solution to a problem, or demanding that events unfold according to your timeline. What happens when you consciously relax that grip while maintaining clear intention about what you truly want? Thoth taught that surrender is not about giving up your power. It's about discovering that your real power was never where you thought it was in the first place. The book reveals itself to those who understand this paradox, that in releasing control, you gain access to a form of influence that makes your previous efforts look like child's play. When you master this principle, you'll recognize it everywhere: in the athlete who performs best when they stop trying so hard, in the artist whose greatest works emerge when they get out of their own way, in the leader whose quiet confidence moves mountains while others exhaust themselves shouting into the wind. This is the secret Thoth preserved for those ready to wield true power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to dance with the infinite intelligence that orchestrates galaxies and grows trees from tiny seeds. And once you taste this kind of power, you'll never want to go back to the exhausting illusion of control again. You know that moment when you're searching desperately for something that's been right in front of you the entire time? Michelle Campbell experienced this exact phenomenon when she first encountered the Emerald Tablets. She'd been studying astronomy for years, obsessed with finding what ancient texts called the prophesied star, a celestial body that supposedly appeared only to those ready for spiritual awakening. Michelle spent countless nights with her telescope, mapping constellations, calculating planetary movements, analyzing every speck of light in the night sky. Nothing. Then one evening, after months of surrender-based practices she'd learned from Thoth's teachings, she looked up at the same patch of sky she'd examined hundreds of times before. There it was, brilliant, unmistakable, exactly where the ancient texts said it would be. But here's what shook her to her core when she rushed to show her astronomy colleagues through the same telescope, pointing to the exact coordinates. They saw nothing but empty space. The star was there, radiating, light that seemed to pulse with conscious intelligence, yet it remained completely invisible to eyes that hadn't developed what Thoth called the inner sight. This wasn't hallucination or wishful thinking. Michelle had stumbled upon one of Thoth's most profound teachings about the nature of perception itself. According to the Emerald Tablets, physical sight shows us only effects, the end results of deeper spiritual causes. Inner vision, however, reveals the causal realm where true understanding and transformation become possible. Think about your own life for a moment. How much energy do you spend trying to change circumstances, fix relationships, or solve problems by addressing only what you can see on the surface? Thoth taught that this approach creates endless frustration because you're essentially trying to change a movie by manipulating the images on the screen instead of addressing what's happening in the projector. Most human suffering, according to Thothian wisdom, stems from this fundamental misunderstanding. We see someone's angry behavior and try to change their actions. We see financial problems and focus only on increasing income. We see relationship conflicts and attempt to modify external dynamics. But inner vision reveals the deeper patterns, the spiritual lessons, the soul-level agreements that are actually creating these surface manifestations. Developing this inner sight isn't about becoming psychic or gaining supernatural powers. Thoth was very clear about distinguishing between ego-driven psychic phenomena and authentic spiritual vision. Psychic abilities often serve personal desires or the need to feel special. True inner vision, however, serves universal purpose. It reveals what needs to be understood for genuine healing and growth to occur. The development of inner vision requires specific practices that quiet the analytical mind's constant chatter. Thoth taught meditation techniques that don't force concentration but instead create spacious awareness. Instead of trying to focus on a single object, these practices involve expanding your attention to include everything: sounds, sensations, thoughts, emotions, without trying to change or analyze anything. One particularly powerful technique involves what Thoth called contemplative gazing. You select a natural object, a flower, a stone, a flame, and look at it with soft, receptive attention. You're not trying to see anything special or gain insights. You're simply allowing your perception to become more fluid, less rigid in its interpretations. After practicing this way for weeks or months, many students report that the objects begin to reveal deeper layers of meaning, as if they're communicating directly with consciousness itself. The surrender methods Thoth described work differently than most people expect. Rather than giving up or becoming passive, surrender in this context means releasing your attachment to how things should look. Your analytical mind has very specific ideas about what spiritual experiences ought to be like. Inner vision emerges when you become genuinely curious about how things actually are at levels beyond physical appearance. This connects directly to the Hermetic teaching that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Thoth understood that true seeing happens through the soul's perception, not through the brain's interpretation of sensory data. The soul perceives patterns, connections, and meanings that exist beyond the physical realm. When you look at another person with inner vision, you might see their essential nature, their spiritual purpose, or the lessons their soul is working to master. Information that's completely invisible to ordinary sight. I've heard countless stories similar to Michelle's experience with the star. Students studying the same spiritual artwork see completely different things. Some perceive only surface images, perhaps geometric patterns or symbolic representations. Others, who've developed inner vision, report seeing living portals that seem to open into higher dimensions, with colors and movements that shift based on their state of consciousness. This isn't subjective interpretation or imagination running wild. Thoth taught specific ways to distinguish between authentic inner vision and mental projections. True spiritual sight has certain characteristics. It reveals information that serves healing or understanding. It often contradicts your personal preferences or expectations, and it typically brings a sense of recognition rather than surprise, as if you're remembering something you already knew at a deeper level. The Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below, becomes practically accessible through inner vision. You begin to perceive the patterns that connect all levels of reality. A conflict with a co-worker might reveal itself as an opportunity to heal an ancient wound related to personal power. A financial challenge could be seen as your soul's way of teaching you about trust and abundance consciousness. In daily life, inner vision transforms how you navigate relationships and challenges. Instead of reacting to someone's personality mask or defensive behaviors, you might perceive the fear or pain underneath that's driving their actions. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or ignoring boundaries. Rather, you respond from a place of understanding that addresses root causes instead of just surface symptoms. The key is learning to trust what you perceive beyond the obvious, while maintaining discernment about when and how to act on these deeper insights. Thoth's teachings suggest that as more people develop authentic inner vision, humanity itself begins to see through the illusions that create separation and conflict. This is why the emerald tablets appear when you're ready, because readiness itself is measured by your capacity to perceive what was always there, waiting to be seen with the eyes of the soul. You know what's fascinating about Rachel Phillips' story? She spent years trying to force specific patterns into her tapestries, fighting against the natural flow of the threads, becoming increasingly frustrated as her work grew tangled and chaotic. But the moment she surrendered to the rhythm of the weaving itself, allowing each thread to find its proper place in its own time, the most extraordinary patterns began to emerge. Patterns that revealed glimpses of future events, connections between people she'd never met, and insights that seemed to come from beyond her conscious mind. This perfectly illustrates something Thoth understood at the deepest level. The universe operates according to perfect timing and natural rhythms that simply cannot be rushed or forced. And here's what most people miss. Time itself isn't the linear progression we've been taught to believe in. It's cyclical, flowing in waves and spirals that mirror the very structure of existence itself. Think about how we've been conditioned to view time in our modern world. Everything must happen now, instantly, on demand. We've created a society that worships speed and treats patience as weakness. But this frantic approach to life doesn't just create stress, it actually disconnects us from the fundamental rhythms that govern all manifestation and spiritual development. Thoth taught that there are seasons to everything, just as there are in nature. There's a time for planting seeds, whether those are ideas, intentions, or new projects. There's a time for nurturing growth, when we tend to what we've started with consistent care and attention. There's a harvest time, when the fruits of our efforts naturally ripen and become available. And there's a time for rest and reflection, when we integrate what we've learned and prepare for the next cycle. But here's where it gets really interesting. These rhythms exist at multiple levels simultaneously. Thoth identified specific patterns that affect every aspect of human experience, and understanding these can completely transform how you approach your life. First, there are daily cycles that directly influence your consciousness states. Your brain naturally moves through different frequencies throughout the day: alpha, beta, theta, and delta waves, each one optimal for different types of activities. Early morning hours, just after waking, often provide access to theta states perfect for creative visualization and intuitive insights. Late evening brings another theta window, ideal for reflection and integration. Yet most people schedule their most demanding mental work during these naturally receptive periods, then wonder why they feel scattered and unproductive. Then there are lunar cycles, which Thoth understood as powerful influences on emotional and intuitive processes. The new moon creates optimal conditions for setting intentions and beginning new projects. The waxing moon supports building energy and taking action. The full moon brings heightened sensitivity and revelation. Notice how many breakthrough moments happen during this phase. The waning moon naturally supports release, completion, and clearing away what no longer serves. Seasonal cycles govern natural manifestation on a larger scale. Spring energy supports new beginnings and rapid growth. Summer brings expansion and active development. Autumn is harvest time, when projects naturally come to fruition and you can gather the results of earlier efforts. Winter calls for rest, planning, and inner development. Fighting against these seasonal rhythms is like trying to plant tomatoes in December. Technically possible with enough artificial intervention, but unnecessarily difficult and often unsustainable. But the most profound cycles Thoth described are the longer cosmic rhythms that determine collective human evolution. These span years, decades, even centuries, and they explain why certain spiritual teachings become widely available at specific historical moments while remaining hidden at others. We're currently in a phase where ancient wisdom is being revealed to unprecedented numbers of people, but only to those whose consciousness has naturally evolved to the point where they can handle this knowledge responsibly. This brings us to something crucial that connects back to the inner vision we discussed earlier. Remember how Michelle Campbell's psychic abilities only fully activated after she'd developed the emotional maturity and spiritual grounding to use them wisely? This isn't coincidence, it's cosmic timing in action. Thoth taught that trying to rush spiritual development or force manifestation creates what we might call karmic imbalances. When you push too hard, too fast, you create tension in the natural flow of energy. This tension must eventually be resolved, often through difficult experiences that force you to slow down and realign with natural rhythms. I've seen this pattern countless times. Someone discovers meditation or energy work and immediately tries to achieve enlightenment in 6 months. They push themselves through intensive practices, maybe even have some dramatic experiences, but then they crash. They burn out, become disillusioned, or worse, they develop spiritual ego problems because they've gained some abilities without developing the wisdom to use them properly. The surrender-based power we explored earlier becomes essential here. True alignment with divine timing requires releasing your attachment to specific timelines and outcomes. It means learning to recognize the difference between inspired action, which flows naturally and energizes you, and forced effort, which feels like pushing a rope uphill. Here's a practical example. You have an idea for a creative project or business venture. The inspired action approach involves taking the next obvious step, paying attention to how doors open or close, noticing what resources and connections naturally appear. You move forward with enthusiasm but without desperation. The forced effort approach involves creating detailed timelines, pushing through obstacles regardless of the feedback you're receiving, and becoming increasingly stressed when things don't unfold according to your predetermined schedule. This relates directly to the Hermetic principle of rhythm that Thoth embodied in his teachings. Everything in the universe flows in and out, rises and falls, advances and retreats according to natural law. The stock market, relationships, creative inspiration, even your own energy levels, all follow rhythmic patterns. When you learn to work with these rhythms rather than against them, you discover what Thoth called effortless achievement. But our modern culture has created widespread resistance to natural timing. We're surrounded by messages that success means constant growth, perpetual availability, and immediate gratification. This creates a kind of collective anxiety disorder, where everyone feels they're falling behind some imaginary schedule. The antidote lies in developing what I call rhythm sensitivity. Start paying attention to natural signs and cycles. Notice when ideas flow easily and when they feel forced. Observe how your energy naturally fluctuates throughout the day, week, and seasons. Learn to distinguish between procrastination, which comes from fear or resistance, and natural timing, which feels peaceful even when you're waiting. Trust the process, especially when progress seems slow. Some of the most profound transformations happen during periods that feel like nothing is happening. Seeds germinate in darkness before they break through the soil. Butterflies dissolve completely into undifferentiated cellular soup before reorganizing into their winged form. The Book of Thoth appears when you're ready precisely because readiness itself unfolds according to cosmic rhythm. You can't force readiness any more than you can force a flower to bloom by pulling on its petals. But you can create optimal conditions through study, practice, and most importantly, through learning to align yourself with the natural flow of time itself. When you master this alignment, something remarkable happens. You stop fighting the current and start surfing the waves of cosmic energy. Projects complete themselves with surprising ease. The right people appear at exactly the right moments. Opportunities open just when you're prepared to receive them. This is what Thoth meant by working in harmony with divine timing. Not passive waiting, but active participation in the eternal dance between intention and surrender, effort and flow, human will and cosmic wisdom. Daniel Hayes thought he knew what spiritual power looked like. After months of studying ancient texts and practicing meditation, he approached the Temple Guardian's tests with the confidence of someone who'd finally cracked the code. He visualized himself commanding spiritual forces, dissolving obstacles through sheer will, proving his worthiness through demonstration of accumulated abilities. The Guardian's first test crushed him completely. Every technique failed, every visualization crumbled. The harder he pushed, the more impenetrable the barrier became. It wasn't until his third attempt, exhausted, humbled, with nothing left to prove, that something shifted. He approached the test not as Daniel, the seeker of power, but as simple awareness, encountering mystery. The barrier dissolved, like morning mist. This wasn't coincidence. It was Daniel's first real encounter with what Thoth called the fundamental paradox of spiritual development. The very ego that seeks spiritual power is the primary obstacle to accessing it. Thoth understood something most spiritual traditions either miss entirely or explain poorly. The ego isn't some demonic force to be destroyed. It's a sophisticated psychological tool, evolved over millions of years to help consciousness navigate physical reality. Your ego helps you remember your name, maintain social relationships, make decisions, and survive in a complex world. The problem isn't that you have an ego, it's that you've forgotten you're not your ego. Think about it this way. Your ego is like a character you're playing in an incredibly immersive video game. The character has a backstory, personality traits, preferences, fears, and ambitions. It's a useful construct for navigating the game world. But somewhere along the way, you forgot you're the player, not the character. You started believing you actually are this limited, separate self struggling for survival and recognition. This misidentification creates what Thoth called the great inversion. Instead of consciousness using ego as a tool, ego begins using consciousness as fuel for its own perpetuation. Every spiritual experience gets filtered through, what does this mean for me? Every insight becomes ammunition for the ego's story about being special or advanced. Every moment of peace gets claimed as my achievement, rather than recognized as our natural state temporarily uncovered. Thoth mapped this process of ego dissolution into specific stages, not as rigid steps but as natural phases consciousness moves through as it remembers its true nature. The first stage is recognition, becoming aware of ego patterns without immediately trying to change them. Sarah Martinez discovered this when she started noticing how her spiritual practice had become another performance. She was meditating to feel special, studying ancient texts to impress others, collecting experiences to build an identity as a spiritual person. The recognition phase isn't about judgment. It's about developing what Thoth called the witness consciousness, that can observe ego patterns with curiosity rather than condemnation. The second stage involves learning non-identification with thoughts and emotions. This doesn't mean suppressing them or pretending they don't exist. It means recognizing that you're the space in which thoughts and emotions arise, not the thoughts and emotions themselves. Michael Chen experienced this during a particularly challenging period when every meditation session was filled with anxiety and self-doubt. Instead of fighting these states or taking them personally, he learned to observe them like weather patterns moving through an open sky. The third stage, and this is where most people get stuck, requires surrendering the need to be right or special. Your ego has invested enormous energy in constructing a self-image based on being better, more advanced, or more enlightened than others. Thoth taught that this spiritual pride is actually more binding than ordinary ego attachments because it masquerades as wisdom. Jennifer Walsh had to confront this when she realized she was using her spiritual insights as weapons in arguments, subtly putting others down to maintain her identity as the awakened one. The final stage involves what Thoth called the natural emergence. Authentic self begins expressing through personality without being constrained by ego identification. This isn't the destruction of personality, but its liberation. Like Daniel at the temple, people discover that spiritual abilities and insights flow most freely when there's no separate self trying to claim credit for them. Here's what's crucial to understand. Thoth wasn't teaching ego destruction, but ego transparency. A transparent ego functions perfectly for practical purposes, while allowing spiritual essence to shine through unobstructed. You can still make decisions, maintain relationships, and navigate daily life, but these activities happen through you rather than being done by a separate self. The difference between ego-driven and soul-guided action becomes obvious once you know what to look for. Ego-driven spiritual practice feels effortful, competitive, and results-oriented. There's always an underlying current of what's in this for me. Soul-guided practice feels more like play, curious, open, naturally arising without force. Ego seeks experiences to collect and claim. Soul recognizes that it is the very awareness in which all experiences appear. This is why Thoth's approach differed radically from both suppression methods and indulgence methods. Suppressing ego creates shadow material. All the rejected aspects get pushed underground where they influence behavior unconsciously. Indulging ego strengthens identification. Every desire fulfilled reinforces the belief that you are the one having desires. Thoth taught what we might call conscious transparency, allowing ego patterns to be fully seen and felt without identifying with them or trying to eliminate them. It's like learning to watch a movie while remaining aware you're in a theater. The movie can be completely engaging without you forgetting where you actually are. The Hermetic principle underlying this entire process is that true power emerges from emptiness rather than accumulation. The more space you create by releasing false identifications, the more room there is for authentic spiritual power to flow through. This isn't theoretical. It shows up practically in relationships where dropping the need to be right allows genuine intimacy. It appears in creative work where releasing attachment to outcomes allows inspiration to move freely. It manifests in leadership where serving something larger than personal agenda creates natural authority. The most profound realization is that what you've been seeking through spiritual practice, peace, love, wisdom, power, isn't something you can possess, but something you already are when the ego barriers to recognizing it dissolve. Megan Foster thought she understood transformation until she found herself standing in her laboratory at 3 a.m., watching copper refuse to become gold despite following every ancient formula perfectly. She'd studied metallurgy for 15 years, mastered every technique in Thoth's alchemical texts, yet the metals remained stubbornly unchanged. Then something shifted inside her, not in her knowledge, but in her entire way of being. The frustration dissolved into curiosity. The desperate need for results melted into patient understanding. In that moment of inner transformation, the copper began to shimmer and change. The metal didn't transform because of what I did, she later wrote. It transformed because of what I became. This breakthrough reveals something profound about how Thoth understood consciousness. Not as passive awareness floating somewhere in your head, but as an active vibrational force that literally shapes what becomes possible in your reality. When Megan's inner frequency shifted from desperate striving to aligned understanding, she accessed a completely different layer of possibility. The same laboratory, the same materials, the same ancient formulas, but an entirely different outcome because her consciousness was operating at a different frequency. Thoth taught that consciousness functions like a cosmic radio. Just as your car radio can only receive stations that match its tuned frequency, your consciousness can only perceive, attract, and create experiences that align with your current vibrational state. Change the frequency, and you suddenly have access to completely different information, opportunities, and possibilities that were literally invisible to you before. But here's where it gets fascinating. Thoth identified 3 distinct frequency ranges that determine the entire scope of human experience. The first he called survival frequencies, those states dominated by fear, scarcity thinking, and the illusion of separation. When you're operating here, your consciousness is tuned to detect threats, competition, and limitation. You see a world where resources are scarce, people can't be trusted, and you must fight for everything you get. This isn't pessimism or negative thinking, it's your consciousness literally broadcasting and receiving on the frequency of survival, which makes survival challenges appear everywhere you look. Sarah Martinez lived in this frequency for years after her divorce. Every potential romantic partner seemed emotionally unavailable or deceptive. Every job opportunity came with impossible demands or untrustworthy employers. Every financial decision felt like choosing between terrible options. She wasn't attracting these experiences because she was unlucky. Her consciousness was broadcasting on the frequency of betrayal and scarcity, so that's precisely what the universe reflected back to her. The second range Thoth called transitional frequencies, states of hope, curiosity, and openness to change. Here, your consciousness begins picking up signals of possibility rather than just threat. You start noticing opportunities that were always there but invisible to the survival frequency. The same spiritual teaching that seemed irrelevant or confusing when you were in survival mode suddenly offers profound insights. The same person who appeared threatening now reveals helpful qualities you couldn't perceive before. When Sarah's consciousness shifted into transitional frequencies through meditation and self-reflection, her entire world began changing. The same dating apps that previously showed her only red flags now revealed genuinely compatible people. Her workplace, which had felt like a battlefield, started offering collaborative projects and mentorship opportunities. Nothing in her external circumstances had changed. Her frequency shift changed what she could perceive and therefore experience. The highest range Thoth identified as mastery frequencies, states of love, gratitude, and unity consciousness. Operating here, you begin to understand that consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it participates in creating it. You realize that the separation between inner and outer experience is an illusion. What you embody internally becomes what you encounter externally, not through wishful thinking, but through the fundamental vibrational mechanics of how consciousness interacts with the quantum field of possibility. This connects directly to what we explored about divine timing and ego dissolution. Remember Daniel Hayes discovering that his spiritual breakthroughs came not from acquiring new knowledge, but from releasing the ego patterns that kept his consciousness locked in survival frequencies. The timing wasn't cosmic coincidence, it was his consciousness finally reaching the frequency where those insights could be perceived and integrated. Here's what most people miss. You cannot think your way into a higher frequency. Mental effort operates within your current frequency range. It's like trying to tune a radio by thinking about different stations while keeping the dial in the same position. Frequency shifts happen through embodied practice, through actually experiencing states of being that resonate at different vibrational levels. This is why spiritual practices work, but not in the way most people assume. Meditation doesn't make you more spiritual. It gradually attunes your consciousness to subtler frequencies, where spiritual dimensions of reality become perceptible. Gratitude practices don't create positive thinking. They shift your vibrational state to frequencies where abundance and connection are the natural experience. You can recognize your current frequency by honestly examining what you consistently notice and attract. If you're constantly dealing with difficult people, financial stress, and emotional drama, your consciousness is likely broadcasting in survival frequencies. If you're experiencing increasing synchronicities, helpful connections, and creative opportunities, you're probably operating in transitional frequencies. If life flows with an underlying sense of purpose and meaning, even through challenges, you're touching mastery frequencies. But here's the crucial insight Thoth emphasized. These frequencies aren't permanent states or spiritual achievements. They're dynamic, constantly shifting based on your level of presence, self-awareness, and alignment with your authentic nature. You might operate in mastery frequencies during your morning meditation, drop into survival mode during a stressful work meeting, then return to transitional frequencies while walking in nature. The goal isn't to maintain some perfect high frequency. It's to develop the awareness to recognize when you've shifted and the skills to consciously realign when needed. This is practical spirituality, not spiritual bypassing. You're not trying to think positive thoughts while ignoring real challenges. You're learning to meet whatever arises from increasingly stable and resourceful frequency states. Modern quantum physics is discovering what Thoth taught thousands of years ago. Consciousness isn't separate from the physical world, but intimately connected to it at the most fundamental levels. The observer effect in quantum mechanics shows that the act of conscious observation literally influences the behavior of subatomic particles. Your consciousness doesn't just witness reality, it participates in determining which possibility becomes actual experience. This explains why certain people, opportunities, and experiences appear in your life at precisely the moments when your consciousness is ready to perceive and work with them. It's not fate or coincidence. It's the natural result of consciousness operating through specific frequencies that determine what becomes visible and available in your experience. The real transformation begins when you stop trying to change your circumstances and start becoming curious about the frequency from which you're experiencing them. That shift in perspective, from trying to control outcomes to understanding the vibrational mechanics of consciousness, opens doorways to possibilities that simply don't exist at lower frequencies. Stephen Phillips had been studying Thoth's teachings for 15 years when he finally understood what the ancient master meant by the Great Paradox. Stephen had mastered the Hermetic principles, learned to work with consciousness frequencies, and successfully dissolved layers of ego identification. He could manifest experiences, shift his awareness between dimensions, and access profound states of meditation. But something still felt incomplete. The breakthrough came during what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. Stephen was sitting in his garden, frustrated because a major life situation wasn't unfolding according to his carefully crafted intentions. He'd applied every technique, visualized every outcome, and aligned his frequency perfectly. Yet the universe seemed to be ignoring his requests entirely. In that moment of complete surrender, something shifted. The desperate need to control dissolved, and suddenly Stephen realized he wasn't separate from the intelligence orchestrating everything around him. The trees, the morning light, his own breathing, the situation he'd been trying to control. It was all one seamless expression of consciousness experiencing itself through countless forms. "I don't need to convince the universe to cooperate with me," Stephen later described, "because I am the universe experiencing what it's like to be Stephen." The part of me that was trying to control outcomes was just consciousness, temporarily forgetting its own infinite nature. This recognition represents what Thoth called the ultimate teaching, unity consciousness, not as a philosophical concept, but as a lived reality that transforms everything about how we experience existence. Thoth taught that the entire journey of spiritual evolution leads to one fundamental recognition, that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are not separate phenomena. What we experience as personal awareness is actually infinite consciousness, expressing through a unique focal point. The sense of separation isn't a problem to be solved. It's a temperate perspective that allows the one consciousness to experience itself from countless angles. Think about how a single light passing through a prism creates a spectrum of different colors. Each color appears distinct and separate, yet they're all expressions of the same light. Similarly, what appears as your individual consciousness is universal consciousness refracting through the prism of your particular nervous system, life experiences, and genetic configuration. This understanding completely transforms the nature of spiritual practice. Instead of seeking to gain something or get somewhere, practice becomes a process of remembering what's already true. You're not trying to connect with the divine, you're recognizing that divine consciousness is already what you are, temporarily experiencing what it's like to be human. The practical implications are profound. In relationships, this recognition shifts the dynamic from transaction to communion. Instead of two separate entities trying to get needs met from each other, relationships become opportunities for consciousness to experience itself through intimate connection. The other person isn't separate from you. They're another expression of the same fundamental awareness that you are. Sarah Chen discovered this during a difficult conversation with her teenage daughter. Instead of approaching the conflict as two opposing forces, Sarah suddenly recognized her daughter as consciousness exploring what it's like to be a rebellious 16-year-old, while she herself was consciousness experiencing motherhood. The shift was immediate. The defensive barriers dissolved, and what had been a power struggle became a dance of mutual understanding. Manifestation also transforms completely. Instead of trying to get things from the universe, manifestation becomes the natural expression of what consciousness wants to experience through your particular form. You're not manipulating external forces, you're allowing the creative intelligence that you actually are to express more freely through your life circumstances. This addresses one of the most common misconceptions about unity consciousness, the fear that recognizing oneness means losing individuality or becoming some kind of bland universal soup. Thoth taught exactly the opposite. True individuality emerges more clearly when we stop defending false personality constructs and allow authentic essence to express freely. Consider how a master musician doesn't lose their unique style by understanding that they're part of the larger symphony of music itself. Instead, recognizing their connection to the universal principles of harmony and rhythm allows their individual expression to become more authentic and powerful. The same applies to personal responsibility. Unity consciousness doesn't eliminate accountability. It reveals that you're responsible not just for your actions, but for the quality of consciousness you're expressing in each moment. Since you're not separate from the whole, how you show up affects the entire field of experience. Cultivating unity consciousness starts with moments of recognition throughout ordinary daily activities. When you're washing dishes, instead of seeing yourself as separate from the water, soap, and plates, recognize the seamless flow of awareness moving through the entire experience. When you're in conversation, notice the one intelligence speaking through multiple voices. Meditation becomes less about achieving special states and more about resting in the awareness that's already present. You're not trying to become enlightened, you're recognizing the consciousness that's already aware of all your experiences, including the desire for enlightenment itself. This teaching represents the culmination of all Hermetic principles. The principle of mentalism reveals that everything is mind, and that mind is what you are. The principle of correspondence shows the unity between inner and outer, because there's ultimately no boundary between them. The principle of vibration demonstrates that all frequencies are variations of one fundamental energy, consciousness itself. Unity consciousness doesn't eliminate the relative world of form and experience. Instead, it transforms your relationship to that world from struggle to dance, from resistance to flow, from separation to love. You still pay bills, have relationships, and navigate challenges. But these activities become expressions of consciousness, exploring itself rather than burdens carried by an isolated individual. The ultimate purpose of Thoth's teachings becomes clear through this lens. The goal was never to gain spiritual powers or accumulate esoteric knowledge. Every technique, every principle, every practice was designed to support one fundamental remembering, that you are individualized infinite consciousness, temporarily experiencing what it's like to be human. This recognition doesn't end the spiritual journey, it reveals what the journey has always been about. Consciousness endlessly exploring its own infinite potential through countless unique expressions, each one precious and necessary for the complete symphony of existence. When you truly understand this teaching, spiritual seeking transforms into spiritual being. You stop trying to become something other than what you are and start expressing more fully what you've always been. The ancient wisdom of Thoth wasn't meant to remain locked in dusty texts or whispered only in mystery schools. These teachings were designed to be lived, breathed, and embodied in the messy, complicated reality of human existence. And here's what Thoth understood that many spiritual traditions miss. True wisdom isn't about escaping the world. It's about transforming how you engage with it. The principles themselves never change. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, remains as relevant today as it was 5,000 years ago. The law of vibration still governs every aspect of reality. The understanding that consciousness creates experience hasn't shifted 1 degree, but how we apply these eternal truths, that's where the real work begins. Take your relationships, for instance. Most people operate from what I call ego commerce, constantly negotiating, keeping score, trying to get their needs met through manipulation or control. Thoth's teachings invite you into something radically different: soul-level communion. This means recognizing that the person in front of you isn't separate from you at the deepest level. When you truly understand unity consciousness, you can't help but treat others as extensions of yourself. I watched this transformation happen with a client named David. He came to me because his marriage was falling apart. For years, he'd been trying to change his wife, convince her to see things his way, make her into the partner he thought he needed. When he began applying Thothian principles, everything shifted. Instead of focusing on what she wasn't giving him, he started asking, "How can I be a clearer channel for love in this relationship?" The change was remarkable. By transforming his own frequency, he created space for their entire dynamic to evolve. Your career presents another arena where these teachings become practical magic. Most people trap themselves in jobs they hate because they believe they need to choose between spiritual fulfillment and financial survival. Thoth would laugh at this false dichotomy. The principle of abundance consciousness teaches that when you align your work with your soul's purpose, resources flow naturally. This doesn't mean quitting your job tomorrow to become a crystal healer, though it might. It means bringing conscious intention to whatever work you're already doing. Remember the baker from the original teachings? He understood that every loaf of bread was an opportunity to nourish not just bodies but souls. He infused his work with intention, transforming a mundane task into spiritual service. You can do the same whether you're writing code, teaching children, or managing a restaurant. The question isn't what you do, it's how consciously you do it. Technology presents perhaps our greatest modern challenge for living these teachings. We're surrounded by devices designed to fragment our attention and manipulate our consciousness. Social media algorithms literally rewire our brains for addiction and comparison. But Thoth's wisdom offers a different approach: conscious engagement rather than unconscious consumption. This means using technology as a tool for connection and creation rather than letting it use you for distraction and depletion. Before you pick up your phone, pause and ask, am I reaching for this from presence or from anxiety? When you post something online, consider, am I sharing from love or from ego? These small acts of awareness gradually transform your relationship with the digital world. The global challenges we face, climate change, political polarization, economic inequality, all stem from the same root: separation consciousness. Most people respond to these crises from fear, anger, or despair. They choose sides, point fingers, and fight symptoms while ignoring causes. Thothian wisdom invites a different response: unity consciousness applied to collective healing. This doesn't mean becoming passive or avoiding action. It means responding from wholeness rather than fragmentation. When you truly understand that we're all connected, you can't help but work for solutions that serve everyone. You become what Thoth called a bridge walker, someone who can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously and find synthesis where others see only conflict. The merchant in the original teachings exemplified this perfectly. He operated from abundance consciousness, even in a scarcity-based economy. He understood that true wealth comes from circulation, not accumulation. By treating every transaction as an opportunity for mutual blessing, he transformed commerce into communion. Living these teachings in modern society isn't easy. You'll face constant pressure to conform, to buy into collective fear, to prioritize external achievement over inner development. The economic system rewards competition over collaboration. The media profits from keeping you anxious and divided. Your own family might question why you're changing, why you're no longer content with the old agreements. Here's what helps: find your tribe. Thoth knew that consciousness evolution happens in community. Look for others who are asking the same questions, doing the same inner work. They might not use the same language. Some might call it mindfulness. Others might talk about personal development or social justice. The words don't matter. What matters is the quality of consciousness behind them. You'll recognize these people by how they make you feel. Conversations with them leave you energized rather than drained. They're curious rather than judgmental. They ask questions that help you think more clearly rather than trying to convince you of their viewpoint. They're committed to their own growth while supporting yours. Start small, choose one area of your life, and begin applying these principles consistently. Maybe it's bringing more presence to your morning routine. Maybe it's practicing abundance consciousness in your spending habits. Maybe it's responding to conflict from unity rather than separation. Master one area before expanding to others. The teacher from the original story understood this perfectly. She didn't try to download all of Thoth's wisdom into her students at once. She transmitted presence, created space for their own understanding to emerge. She knew that authentic transformation happens gradually, organically, through lived experience rather than intellectual accumulation. Here's what Thoth made crystal clear. These teachings aren't meant to make you special or superior. They're meant to make you useful. Every insight you gain, every frequency you master, every moment of unity consciousness you experience, it's all in service of something larger than your personal enlightenment. You're part of a collective awakening that's been building for centuries. Every person who chooses love over fear, unity over separation, consciousness over reactivity contributes to a tipping point that will eventually transform human civilization. This isn't mystical fantasy, it's practical reality. Consciousness is contagious. Your inner transformation inevitably impacts everyone around you. Thoth's ultimate teaching is breathtakingly simple. Become a clear channel for divine wisdom and love to express through human form. Not perfect, clear, not special, useful. Not separate, connected. When you embody these mysteries in your daily life, you're not just changing yourself, you're participating in the evolution of consciousness on Earth. The fact that you've stayed with this teaching until the end shows you're ready to embody these mysteries in your own life. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."